Intensive parenting, which is this dominant framework around what good parenting looks like, has essentially consecrated the over-control, the over-involvement, and the overprotection that we're seeing right now as markers of devoted parenting. It's still authoritative parenting, which is this love with limits, warmth with boundaries, what's best for kids across the board. Welcome back to the Parenting Pair podcast. I'm Dr. Suzanne Allen.
And I'm Dr. Annalise Caron.
And sometimes as clinicians, you come across a book or a resource that you are like, yes. This is it. This is going to be so helpful to so many kids and families. And Annalise and I came across that book, and it is called Parenting Anxiety: Breaking the Cycle of Worry and Raising Resilient Kids. And after we had read this, I said, I am going to reach out to Dr. Meredith Elkins, who I do not know, and who has a very busy career as she heads the Anxiety Mastery Program at McLean Hospital in Massachusetts and is on faculty at Harvard. I'm just going to send her a cold email and ask her to join us. And because she is not only a talented clinician and an excellent author, she's a lovely person and has agreed to join us. So welcome, Dr. Elkins, to the podcast.
Oh, Suzanne, Annalise, thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. And I know that there's so much overlap in the work that we do with kids and with parents. So I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Wonderful. Well, let's jump right in. You start the book really talking about intensive parenting and all of the pressure that parents today feel. And it's quite a bit of pressure, but also how that, sort of need and sense of I've got to do more and I've got to do this and I've got to, help my child in this way actually sometimes can backfire. And I was just curious, what made you start the book there? And why is that important, for parents?
Absolutely. So I started there because I think it's really impossible to understand why modern parents are responding to our child's anxiety the way that we do without first understanding the cultural context in which we're all operating. And so intensive parenting, which is this dominant framework that you were referring to around what good parenting looks like, has essentially consecrated the over-control, the over-involvement, and the overprotection that we're seeing right now as markers of devoted parenting. And the problem with that is that when your child is anxious, intensive parenting is actually hijacking your deepest biological drive to protect your kids. And it tells you that whatever feels uncomfortable must also be unsafe, and that it's your job as the parent to shield your child from discomfort. But when you do that consistently, it just inadvertently fuels more anxiety and not less. And so parents who are already anxious themselves and already stretched paper thin are just swimming in this cultural current that's pointing them to responding in exactly the way that's going to make things worse. So I really felt like, I just needed to name that culture first so that parents could start to see what was shaping them.
And I think parents, you're hitting the nail on the head here, feel so overwhelmed and feel like they're doing the right thing because the messaging everywhere is you need to do more. You need to be in this sport. You need to get them this tutor. You need to have them achieve in this way or be exposed to this thing. And so then that does lead to parents feeling like, well, I should be. And they look around and see their neighbors doing this or their friends, their child's friend is doing that. And so it just gets overwhelming that it feels like parents who probably, as you mentioned, are already anxious themselves can kind of really burn themselves out.
Absolutely. And I think, parenting is an inherently anxiety-driven experience, right? This is just the consequence of loving something so much, is that it's going to spike our anxiety. And parenting and anxiety have been around forever, right? As long as we've been parents, as humans have been parents, there's been this anxiety. But I think that what's different about this moment is that cultural piece. And I think once we can help parents see it, see the water in which we're all swimming, then we can choose to do something different. We can choose to really say, like, is this message actually serving me and my family well? And that I find, frankly, really empowering for parents. and for myself, frankly.
That quote I actually wrote down when reading your book because it really, stuck out to me once you recognize the waters in which you were swimming, meaning all of this cultural pressure, you can choose to go against the tide. And you have to take the pause and slow down in this busy world and then feel the confidence to ride against the tide of all of this pressure and kind of over-parenting or intensive parenting. And I think that's really hard for people, even when they see it.
It is so hard, and it's hard for clinicians as well who do this work. And at the end of the book, I share part of a story, which was really the genesis of the book itself, and it was about an experience that I had as a parent that was really hard for me, both as a parent but also as a clinician. And oddly enough, it started with Irish Stepdance. I live in a part of Massachusetts that is affectionately known as the Irish Riviera, and this is how my people dance. So if you go out and about in this part of the world, you will see this. And years ago, when my daughter was young, she saw it. She was like, I want to do that. And we signed her up, and she was so excited. But then on the first day of class, she panicked and she refused to go into the studio. And I treat anxiety disorders for a living, so you'd think that this would have been like my finest hour. But because I know as a clinician that, that kids need support, but encouragement to do hard things like this, and that there was nothing dangerous in that Irish step studio, and that I needed to encourage her to stay the course, even when everything in her wanted to push her away from it. But in that moment, I also realized how influenced I had been as a parent with a social media feed by all of these waters in which we're swimming. And I'd been able to sort of dismiss this before, but when your own child is struggling, it just brings all of this stuff back. So I remember being like, gosh, if I don't pull her from Irish Step immediately, am I, writing the origin of her childhood trauma? Am I creating a fundamental attachment injury that she'll never recover from and our relationship is doomed? Am I dysregulating her nervous system? Am I spiking her cortisol? All of these messages that we are just inundated with came to bear. And it was a lot harder for me to push them aside in that moment where her anxiety increased and mine naturally followed. And so this book was already starting to take shape, but this is where that tension crystallized for me and where I wanted to offer something different to the reader. Not just like an outside cultural critique of the intensive parenting movement, and not as a, purely clinical treatment manual. This is how you address anxiety across the spectrum, across the age range, which I try to do in the book as well, but is really looking at where do these two come together? And then how can we use the concept of psychological flexibility, and how can we build that muscle to help us help ourselves and our kids better?
I found that so validating, your choice to start there. Because I did find, and I would recommend this for parents, it's a really great outline and explanation of kind of treatment for anxiety as well. But I think that choice to start there, because what's so interesting about that story, and I've had similar experience as a parent, is we have thousands and thousands of hours of education and training working with children with anxiety and parents struggling with these similar situations and questions. And yet you, as a child development and anxiety specialist, had this moment where even you did not know, is this a push or a pull
Right,
moment?
exactly.
So any of us, right, who then, and we're all inundated by kind of so many of these cultural messages, it feels so overwhelming for parents because the stakes feel so high. Like you said,
They
it's
feel
not
so
just,
high.
oh, my child will be sad or she'll be mad at me. No longer are we in that era of parenting. We are in the era of you have now created a lifelong trauma that your child will carry with them into their 20s. And those stakes feel very high. And I think it leads to a lot of parents feeling really frozen and really losing our central compass of, who is my child? What is happening in this moment? Which direction do I go? And what is too much or too extreme? What is too uncomfortable for a child? Are we overprotecting, underprotecting? Where are we?
Yeah, it's I think that we have, in a way, lost the plot. I mean, everyone's always looking for, like, what is the new parenting fad? Or am I a gentle parent? Am I a gentle parent? Am I a, a FAFO parent? Like, what am I? And I sometimes like talk with my colleagues, like, what happened to authoritative parenting?
Right.
Like, we had this back in the 70s.
And nothing's changed. I mean,
And nothing's changed.
right.
It's still what we know from such rich and broad clinical data and research analysis is that authoritative parenting, which is this love with limits, warmth with boundaries, this is what's best for kids across the board. And we have decades of research to support this. And I think that's that inner compass that you were referring to, Suzanne, of we know that our kids need to be loved, that we need to validate their emotions, and we don't want to let anxiety drive the bus and make determinations about what they can and can't do and what we as a family can and can't do because we're so terrified of negative emotions.
I really want you to expand on that, but I also just want to highlight what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that there's no one moment in parenting that's like one and done. That you're going to send someone on some horrible track because you did go this way or didn't go that way. The stakes can feel so high for people.
Yes.
But what you're saying is if you keep that, sort of love and boundaries, connection and understanding of who your child is, with some, direction, you're going to be okay. So if there's the moment that you do maybe avoid, right, when maybe you would have hoped that you didn't, there's going to be time and time again that you're going to have the opportunity to try and to regroup. And I think that's something that's lost for parents as well. I would love to hear about validation, but I first, for parents who are listening who may have a little less familiarity with anxiety, we hear a lot about that avoidance is a problem, right? And so could you speak to that for listeners who are a little newer to thinking about anxiety
Sure.
or may have, younger kiddos who they haven't thought this through with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the principle, I think, at the core of the book. And I come back to it again and again, which is that avoidance fuels anxiety. And it feels so logical and so instinctive that if your kid is in distress in a moment, that it's your job as the parent to nip the distress in the bud, to pull them away from that. And it works, right? In the short term, everybody feels better. Everybody feels better. But what happens over time is that avoidance teaches the brain that the only reason that I feel better, that my kid feels better, is because we avoided the situation. And so we don't get the chance to learn that, actually, if we hadn't escaped, what would have happened? Probably nothing awful. And even if it was something awful, we probably would survive it, right? So it's a missed opportunity. And then, so paradoxically, anxiety grows rather than shrinks because of that avoidance. And so the reframe that I and you all and clinicians who do this work encourage is moving away from conceptualizing anxiety as something dangerous, something that needs to be eliminated, toward seeing it as a normal, natural, and ultimately harmless alarm system that is overfiring. So understanding the biology behind the fight or flight response, why this evolved to keep us safe and how it's now still going off, even when we're like not in danger of being, devoured by a predator or, abandoned in the wilderness to die, but that everything is still firing as if that were the case, can actually help people feel less frightened of anxiety itself. And so when anxiety itself is less scary, you become less avoidant. And that's really the core of resilience.
Right. Absolutely. When you're willing to experience that difficult emotion,
Absolutely.
but take the step forward anyway, where might that bring you? For sure. You spend a good bit of time in helping parents understand how to help their, child or teen approach the things that are difficult or that they fear, but you really spend a good amount of time, maybe a whole chapter, on validation of anxiety as well.
Yes.
Could you speak to that, what you mean by that and why that's important?
And I think this is validation in our modern parenting zeitgeist. I think its meaning has become sort of diluted. We sort of think that, like, okay, this is just like the checklist that you put on this marker of good parenting. Like, I see that you're feeling anxious, or, oh, you feel sad. And then I've done my good parenting thing and then I'm done. but it's actually a clinical skill that works on a brain-based level, because when emotions are high, the connections between our emotional center of the brain, right, like our reptilian brain, like deep in the core, and our prefrontal cortex right up here behind our forehead, which is responsible for rational thought, for thinking, for planning, for making good choices. When emotions are high, those connections kind of go temporarily offline. And so this is why folks will say, like, have the experience of like, I couldn't think straight when I was overwhelmed or when I was anxious. And you certainly cannot rationalize with an anxious kid whose prefrontal cortex is not fully cooked in moments of high emotion. So validation is a skill that helps to bring the prefrontal cortex back online by acknowledging, I see that you feel completely overwhelmed. And it makes sense because starting a new school is hard and you want people to like you. That is going to be a better pathway to a calmer and more values consistent response than jumping right into everybody's going to love you. You don't have anything to worry about. Your teacher's going to love you. You're the best kid ever. Don't worry about that. And I think particularly when we're talking with teenagers, right, they can smell insincerity and sort of trite, you're the best kid ever, you have nothing to worry about. That just feels dismissive to them. So I encourage families, rather than memorizing a single script, really to think about, the goal of validation, which is to let the other person know that what they're feeling in the moment makes sense and that you see them.
And how much more willing I am to approach things or to manage things that I don't want to deal with. Forget about our teens and our tweens and our, young adults that we're raising and setting into the world. If I've had a tough day at work or something's gone really badly and I walk in the door and my husband just jumps to, well, let's problem solve it this way, or you've got this. You always get through this, so don't even worry about it. Then my urge is to scream, right? Like, no, you're not hearing me.
You're not hearing me.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we all feel that. But when someone sits with you and listens to you and says, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I understand why you feel that way. Then you can feel like, okay, someone's with me, someone cares.
And not treating validation as a strategy, right? A strategy to get your kid into the right space, mental space or physical space, right? Seeing it as a relational approach to being fully present with someone and trying to understand them and support them, I think has a very different feel than validation as a strategic tool to get a specific outcome. Even though we do know that actually really genuine validation often is more likely to lead to certain outcomes, as you're saying, those connections starting to work a little bit better in their brains.
I think that's such a wise fine point to put on this, because of course, as parents, we are looking for what is the skill that's going to move the needle.
Yeah. And we've got to move some needles.
Yeah.
School starts at a certain time. The plane leaves in a certain time.
Right. Exactly. And so it can be disappointing not to have the one skill or strategy that's going to make your kid waltz happily into the school building or get on the plane. And we do know that you are less likely to be successful in that effort if you are starting from a place of problem solving, rational minding this, arguing your kid out of feeling anxious, which has that ever worked for anyone ever? It certainly hasn't worked for me. So I think that validation is a skill that we can teach parents to use and to incorporate. And as you're saying, recognizing that it may not get the action that you want, but that it is often the best tool that you have in the moment is really important.
Yeah. I think once, you've taken that time to, really see your child where they are and validate what they're feeling, you also then pair that in the book with moving forward towards approach, right? And trying to avoid avoidance, so to speak. And we can speak more to that, with regard to, or could you speak to, what that means, what does that mean in action for parents? And there was one nuance I'd love for you to speak to as well about how sometimes as parents that you may not feel entirely confident that it's going to work or you're going to be able to help your teen approach the thing that they don't want to do, right? But that there's something to projecting a sense of confidence anyway, and belief in them that
I
they
loved
can,
that.
and it's such an important nuance because I think when parents feel nervous inside or overwhelmed themselves, it's hard to then say, to your teen, no, let's do this thing or maybe send this email or maybe, approach
Because
that.
we don't know how it's going to work out either, right? We may recognize that they're going to be physically safe and, as you said, not devoured by a predator.
Right.
If they're walking into a social situation, we don't know if someone's going to speak with them.
Right. We have to accept that uncertainty.
If the person's going to reject them, if their speech is going to go poorly, if they're going to mess up their line in the school play. And I think sometimes I so appreciated you mentioned that because it is hard as parents too to watch their distress. And then particularly if you don't know that it's going to be okay either, to then exude the confidence that's needed to help them do the hard thing.
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the hardest things that we ask parents to do is to project that confidence genuinely, right? Again, because kids can sniff out insincerity like a bloodhound. But at the same time, when we're not totally feeling confident in ourselves, but this is so important to remember that parents are our children's, first and most enduring barometer for how we see the world around us. Even if you think that your teenager does not care, what you think, what you do, they are really aware of that, and they will continue to be. So in a situation where you anticipate that your child might have a hard time, it makes sense that you are going to be more anxious for them, and you are going to be scanning their environment, looking for situations where the wheels could come off the bus. But if your kid sees that, if for example, your teen is nervous around like big holiday gatherings, you guys are going into one, you anticipate that they're going to be uncomfortable. And so you are scanning the room, you are checking in with them repeatedly, or if you are even giving them an out, like, we can just, if you want to leave, just tell me and I'll tell Aunt Vicky you feel sick and we can go. It feels like the kindest thing to do because like you're in their corner, but it also signals to them that you don't believe that they can handle it. So of course they're going to believe that they can't handle it, and probably that there's something actually dangerous here, because otherwise, why would you be making an escape plan? So instead, drawing from the work of Ellie Lebowitz, I offer a tool in the book called a supportive statement, which is, what parents can pull from in that moment where you're not totally sure what to say or what to do, but we want to do something that is more likely to help than hurt. And a supportive statement is a 2-part tool that incorporates that validation that we already talked about and expressing confidence. So it looks like, it makes sense that you're nervous right now. And here comes the confidence piece. I've seen you push back against anxiety before, or I know you can handle hard things. Is a supportive statement going to make your kid be like, yes, absolutely, mom, like that's how I feel about myself? No. But what it does is it starts to plant seeds for your child about how you view them. Even if you're a little hazy about how you view the confidence in the moment, it starts to plant seeds, and that can pay dividends over time. So in that moment where you don't know what to say and you don't know what to do, use that supportive statement, practice using it, start using it with colleagues, with partners, and then apply it with your kids.
And I love you highlighting that parenting is really for the long haul, right? And so those seeds that you're planting, to your point, it might help reduce the distress in that moment a little. It might not, but the messaging over time, I think, can really add up, for kids. And I clicked into what you said about, kind of your kids and teens are picking up in terms of how we interact in the world and what sort of messages we give about how dangerous the outside world may be. And so it's important to be aware of that. Another nuance that I thought was really, helpful and great that you added in the book was for parents, which, because by the by, if you have, children who have anxiety, it's very likely that you may experience some anxiety. We all experience anxiety sometimes. That it's helpful not only to model courage, like, oh, I can do this, I'm going to do this, but also, to model like that you are a little nervous and that this is hard and you're going to try to act brave at the same time. It's not just, oh, this is easy and I can go do this. And why did you choose to highlight that point, and why is that important for teens to see?
I chose to highlight that because I think one of the messages that we're getting in our intensive parenting culture, which comes from a valid and well-meaning place, is the importance of co-regulation for, calm parents to have calm kids. But I think perhaps parents are over-interpreting this suggestion to mean that you need to be calm and unflappable all the time. Otherwise, your kid is going to be a disaster. But I think that the challenge with that is that if your kids only see you as this unflappable, anxiety-free, endlessly calm person in their life, then they are going to feel broken and alone when they experience hard emotions themselves. And then they're more likely to think, what's wrong with me? I actually don't see this in my environment. So I am one of the broken ones. And so I want to try to guide parents away from that. So modeling bravery is really important, but it doesn't mean pretending that you're fearless. I actually love when parents can share with kids situations where they felt really anxious or overwhelmed and actually use this in a narrative way. So for example, if I get called in to present for a big group at the hospital and I don't have adequate time to prepare, and I'm like, how can I get out of this? I try to like share that with my kid afterwards of like, this happened and everything in my body and in my mind told me I don't want to do this. I'm going to screw this up. But I didn't want anxiety to win there. Like, this was important for me. This was important for my career. And so I did it. And was it perfect? No. Did I feel really sweaty and anxious? Like, yeah, absolutely. But I did it, and I'm proud of myself for doing that. And I think that the modeling that kind of bravery can really help become, again, a template for your kids for realizing that being okay doesn't mean the absence of negative emotions. It means doing the hard thing if it helps meet your goals and is in line with your values, despite the hard emotions. So I hope that that's the nuance that parents can pick up from this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that. Mm-hmm. I love that. It's important for kids to know that we're vulnerable too, and things are hard, and distress isn't always bad. Sometimes it means you just really care about something, like your presentation that you give. Maybe you want to do a good job, and so you get a little nervous beforehand, which isn't really a bad trait. And often that distress doesn't last through the whole presentation. Maybe it's the first 5-10 minutes, and then it may go down. So, but if we don't share that, then our kids don't know that we feel it.
Yeah.
So it's a really good point.
Do you find in your work and that your clinical work that it can be helpful, or that you may often refer parents for their own treatment for anxiety? Because I can imagine, again, I find this a lot working with clients with OCD, parents or adults who will say, I'm not sure kind of where the typical is, like
yeah, of course.
How far apart do people keep their raw meat and their vegetables in the grocery cart? Like, I would never shop for those in the same incident. Like, what does kind of a person without OCD, usually someone will say, what does a normal person do, right? That I think this can be really challenging sometimes for parents who are struggling with anxiety themselves to often kind of know what is threatening or not threatening because their sensors may be wired to go off kind of more consistently or with a greater intensity.
Yeah, I think another piece of this is when families, of course, have finite resources. If your child is struggling and you want to make sure that you're prioritizing their care. And so if it's like, okay, if it's my kid getting treatment or I'm getting treatment, like, I'm going to go with my kid, right? That's often the response. And sometimes we find that because anxiety and OCD, like these things are such dynamic forces within families. Sometimes a child's not going to be able to make adequate progress in treatment if there's anxiety within parents or within the family system that is making it such that, anxiety is still driving the bus. So if we clinically feel that a parent may benefit from their own care, particularly not just because like it would be nice for you to have the support, but actually I think this is fundamental to your child improving throughout their care, then that's definitely a recommendation that we will make. And to follow up on your question of how do we know if something is normal, if something is clinical, I always like to guide families to looking at 3 markers across the lifespan. And those things are interference, distress, and duration. So if your anxiety or if your child's anxiety is causing them to change their daily routine in significant ways, if it's just absolutely unbearable, it's causing distress that doesn't stop, and if it's been going on for more than a few weeks to a few months, then those 3 things in combination are often signals that something has risen beyond that spectrum of normative anxiety and tipped into the clinical realm, and that it might be important to get help. So I'll often frame it to adults with whom I'm working. If anxiety weren't a major player here, are there things that you would be doing differently? What are you doing because of anxiety right now that you wouldn't be doing otherwise? Or conversely, are there things that you're not doing because of anxiety that you would be doing? And I think that can help get at how interfering is this for my life, and can be a really nice anchor to help determine whether more help is needed.
Yeah, I think for the parent themselves or for their child, but in both directions. I know we're coming towards time here, but if you have a few more moments, one very important area that you talk about throughout the book is psychological flexibility. And as Suzanne's bringing up the possibility of parents seeking treatment for themselves and getting support for themselves, could you speak a little bit about psychological flexibility, what that means, and why it's important for parents of kids who have anxiety?
I'm happy to speak about that. Psychological flexibility is the goal of many of today's most supported evidence-based treatments. Is cultivating psychological flexibility is really at the core of them. So I think it's important to unpack what is it? It is the ability to non-judgmentally notice what's happening inside of you, your thoughts, your feelings, your urges, everything that's sort of that private experience in the moment, no matter how painful. And then choose to act in ways that are actually consistent with your values. So even if emotions are pulling you in a certain way. So in parenting, it could play out, in those emotionally charged moments where your kid is sobbing on the sidelines of the soccer field, and you feel this pull to either swoop in and take them home, or to snap and demand that they get their butt on the field. So psychological flexibility is that ability to pause, to notice what's going on in yourself and the intensive parenting narrative that's probably fueling it. And then to make a choice, to notice that, okay, I'm in danger here of getting hooked by my thoughts and feelings. And I know that I really value encouraging my kid to work through this, not to bail. And I also value not like yelling at them to get on the field. So I'm going to make a more measured choice. And it sounds great, right? But it's hard to cultivate. It's like a muscle that we need to build over time. And I also want to highlight that it is a lot harder to do when we are stressed out. And the research is really clear on this. Psychological flexibility was actually an adaptive thing. Psychological inflexibility, was actually adaptive for our ancestors who needed to be able to make quick decisions. So I think we can all think about times where we're really emotionally overwhelmed and our thinking becomes more rigid, and our behaviors, we go into typical behavior patterns that we always do, and we become less flexible. again, that was profoundly adaptive when we had a lot of danger around us and we needed to make quick decisions. But in our modern world, cultivating the ability to kind of unhook from our painful thoughts and feelings in the moment and to make a choice to do something that is hard, that is actually what exposure therapy is. Again, that core component of treatment for anxiety and for OCD, it's noticing that every fiber of your being wants you to not be in the situation that you're in and kind of choosing to push yourself a little bit further and do that hard thing because it's in line with your goals. So psychological flexibility was not built in a day. And in my book, at the end of the sections toward the latter part of the book where I'm talking more about treatment, I give reflection points for parents who are reading it to help try to build this psychological flexibility muscle and then just start applying it to their own life and to their parenting life.
One of the just statements you made in the context of speaking about psychological flexibility in the book that I thought, if we could just put on all the 18-wheelers on the highway so everyone can be reminded of it, when you're stressed and running late for things. It's just the idea that there's no one right choice every time in every situation. Yes. And I think that, it gets to that intensive parenting. I have to do it the right way or this way, or she has to achieve this goal or has to stay at the soccer field. It may be when you're thinking in a flexible way that if your child maybe had a really bad night's sleep the night before or, grandma just passed away 2 weeks ago, it actually might be the time that maybe we don't stay or we just stay on the sidelines but don't play and it's all validation. And there might be another time where it's like, no, let's sit out this quarter, but then you'll get back in. And I think taking the pressure off parents in that way and reminding them that they're, it's child dependent, it's family dependent, it's cultural context dependent. And it's, on any given day, we want to move in the direction of our values, but we don't have to be perfect at it.
Absolutely. And I think that anyone who's telling you that there is one right way to respond to a parenting dilemma is selling something. So, because it's not, nuance is hard to communicate in our culture right now where everything is confined to like a certain absurdly short number of characters, or it has to be delivered in a 1-minute reel or something like that. It is really hard to get at the complexity of how to respond in these situations because every kid is different, every family system is different, and the inputs in that day are really different. So there's no one right way. And I think that if we can keep a framework of recognizing that avoidance fuels anxiety. And so within the choice that I'm making now, do I think that this is going to help my kid down the road to be more flexible, to cultivate more independence? Or do I think that the choice that I'm going to make here around anxiety is going to keep them avoiding more and more? Is it going to shrink their life for them in the long run? And maybe you just need to make the decision toward the latter that time, and that's okay, to your point, Annalise. And keeping that framework in mind can help you to start guiding things in the right direction over time.
What you said about things being, it's very hard to, provide nuance in the context of a 90-second reel or something like that. That's one of the reasons why we're so grateful that you decided to come on the podcast. And I'd like to add, due to the limitations of time, for those of you, who are interested in Dr. Elkin's books, Parenting Anxiety, Breaking the Cycle of Worry, and Raising Resilient Kids, we really spoke today only about a portion of her book. And the third part of her book goes into more specific details about ways that you specifically can approach, some anxieties that your child or teen may be, or think about, with some level of flexibility, things that, anxieties that your child and teen may be facing. So it's very helpful. And all of it is grounded in science and cognitive behavioral therapy, in brain science. And so it's definitely worth the read. Thank you so much in your busy workday to jump on and speak with us today. I really, really appreciated the discussion.
This was wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely delighted and honored to be with you all. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone listening.
Yeah. Wonderful. As always, everyone, if you've listened to this podcast today and you think, oh, I have a friend whose, son or daughter is struggling with anxiety, or if you think it might be useful to anyone you know, please pass it on, share it. We'd like to get, important and sound information that is nuanced and truly helpful out to as many people as we can. Additionally, if you've enjoyed this, please remember to just give us a quick rating review, because that does help to sort of raise us up in the podcast world such that other people can listen. So thank you.
And have a great week.